Hi everyone, and welcome to my presentation on combating ELA stereotypes. I don't know about you guys, but as a teaching candidate, often when I say that I'm going to be teaching English language arts, often the reply I get from people is something about, ugh, why? Or they give me a very specific novel or unit that I must not teach in my classroom because they hated it so much. So my presentation is based around these two big quotes that I've heard from students about why they dislike ELA, and I'm going to unpack them and then show how other educators and myself can kind of get to the root of these stereotypes, figure out why they're being said, and then how we can combat them to make sure that ELA is an engaging and fun subject for even the most biased of learners on the subject. Oftentimes when people talk about ELA, they say it's boring. Essentially this just means I don't care, or I can't relate to the content. And this can stem from novels being dated or centering around straight, white, wealthy male protagonists. There's a very narrow scope when it comes to who's getting published and who the stories were about when it came to the literary canon. So a way that we can combat that is through relevancy. I could talk about relevancy all day long. It could have its own presentation in and of itself, but I'm just going to say that it's a really vital part of how our brains make meaning on a cellular level. Our neurons are constantly firing, and we're not going to be able to make any connections. The neurons will just keep missing each other and flying by each other until it's connected to something that's relevant to us. And that sparks this connection between the neurons, and that's how our brain starts to make neural fields, and that's how we establish meaning. This is also really benefited through emotional connection to what we're talking about in class, because if you're emotionally connected to something, it's doubly going to make meaning in your mind because it's double layer. So it's not only something that's applicable to my life, it's something that I already have emotions invested in, or I'm creating emotions that are invested about it. Emotions are a critical part of how we learn to think rationally and experience meaning. I mean, when I think back to school, I don't necessarily remember everything that my teacher was saying, but I remember how they made me feel. I remember what they were talking about made me feel. So it's really important that we not only connect relevancy, but also emotional connection to what we're talking about in class. And a really great tool to use to do that is young adult literature. And another one is including social justice in the classroom. So young adult literature, I love talking about this. So a big thing when it comes to traditionalists is that the literary canon is untouchable, and it is the way to teach about literary devices. I mean, there's no other way to do it. They're just on this pedestal of perfection. And I think that it's interesting because it's really narrowing in the amount of resources and tools that we have to teach students about these literary devices. I mean, especially when it comes to struggling and reluctant readers, we really need to prioritize having relatable and engaging content. And that comes through, reading about experiences that are relatable to teens, teen interests. And this will really inevitably lead to increased reading. So that's going to increase literary skills. These young adult literature is a great vehicle for teaching these devices and these literacy skills, especially when it comes to struggling and reluctant readers, especially because it's relatable and it's at a more appropriate reading level. Old English and these dated novels are oftentimes going to be outside of the reading level of some of your students. And it's like, if we have these options for great novels in our midst, then we need to be able to use them, especially if they're going to be much more exciting and engaging for our students. Another important aspect of young adult literature is that a lot of more current novels have stories about a wider range of people. They have multiple narrators of different races and sexualities. There's a lot more inclusivity and diversity in these stories, which is really important in our classroom. That kind of leads us into social justice in the classroom, because I really am a big proponent of this, because it really helps break down that wall of the world of academia and school and the world outside and the real world. I feel like oftentimes if you go from 45-minute class to 45-minute class to 45-minute class and you're stuck in this world of school, it feels so foreign and different from the world that you lead outside of school. The structure is completely different. Your expectations are so different. So it kind of can lead to this thinking of, well, school is just school. It has no impact on my life outside of it. So this class doesn't even matter. And I really think it's important that we break that wall down. So a great way to do that is through social justice in the classroom. And this really increases our emotional impact, because these issues are human rights issues. They're inherently emotional. They're talking about human rights. And even if per se you don't find it emotional just reading about it, these are issues that either a student is going to have experience with, or maybe someone in their family has, or their friends have. These are issues in our society, and that's relevant to us. Our society is relevant to us. Social justice is also a great lens to teach students about self-awareness, because while you're thinking externally and in the big picture, you also have to think internally and maybe think about the type of privilege that you have or don't have. And it's also a great lens for teaching critical thinking, because it's like problem solving on a massive scale. You know, we might not be able to solve all of these problems, but it gets our brains thinking in these multi-layered problems and solutions and how everything works together. Social justice is also an incredible way to make sure that your community is inclusive. And it's a great way to encourage team building, because it feels good to be a part of something greater and to work towards change, especially if that's an issue that matters to you. So this is a great way to promote students that not only can get an A on an exam, but are going to become more moral and thoughtful and active citizens in our society. A great way to combine the two things that I just talked about is through these examples of novels, which are great resources for young adult literature that are centered around social justice issues. So take a look at those after if you want more resources. Okay, there we go. So another big quote that we often hear about why students might dislike ELA is that I hate reading and writing. And oftentimes this stems from maybe irrelevant or difficult novels, but really mostly it's coming from a place of not feeling confident in your reading and writing skills. This could be because a teacher in the past has maybe commented that you weren't the greatest in that certain subject, or maybe subjective grading has really not been your friend, or maybe you're more of a hands-on learner, and so all of this pen to paper is not really playing into your skills as a learner. So ways to combat this are through, again, young adult literature, which can make things at a more appropriate level, but also non-risk writing, maybe journaling that doesn't have a grade attached to it, or we can be creating other content other than just essays or book reports. We can embrace this idea of multiliteracies and using non-print media in the classroom and as projects. So this is something I'm really excited about and I'm going to talk about next. First of all, just to kind of showcase what we're talking about, there is a difference between traditional literacy and digital literacy. So traditionally, literacy just means, reading and writing skills, but that's kind of a narrow scope for something that's very broad and very difficult to define. So with an increase in technology in our society, it's really important that we expand our idea of literacy to include all of these digital skills and resources and ways of thinking that are important in our society today. So this is really another way to make what you're teaching practical. We have all of this talk about making our students college or career ready, but this is a way to actually, teach practical skills. And it's never a good idea to just dismiss the idea of teaching technology because maybe it's not something that you are used to, because this is a way, honestly, if you don't include technology in the way that you teach or teaching your students, you're essentially continuing an unfair system and ensuring that illiteracy is going to remain a problem. So a big way to broaden our understanding of literacy is to think about the New London Group term of multiliteracies. In 1996, they had a study, and it really did a great job for expanding the scope of what literacy means. And it accounts for a way more culturally and linguistically diverse student body and a more globalized society. Also, this multiliteracy term accounts for all of the new variety of text forms in our society and all of the new multimedia technologies, and how this is really important for our understanding of literacy today, because creating way more of these channels of communication is really important, not only for preparing students for after school, but it's also a really helpful way when it comes to not narrowing in the scope of literacy so that it becomes a bias tool, because oftentimes literacy can be a tool that's used in a biased way to only ensure that certain students have an easier time and certain students don't, based on issues that they really can't control. And this is also really why it's important to include non-print media in our classroom, because this helps students that might be, struggling with English as a second language, because it's including visual and audio cues and just all these different channels of communication and accessing a topic other than just a teacher talking about it in a language that might not be their first. So yeah, media non-print text, again, helpful for a diverse group of students, and it's also relevant to their daily lives. It's fun when we think about things that students do at their home lives, or things that are of value and important to them and really help their understanding of the world. They're all often oriented around technology and media. For instance, people online chat all the time or in chat rooms. This honestly can be really applicable to ELA. It's communicating with people all over the world, constructing worldviews, and helping with language expression. Commenting on fan fiction is essentially ELA class. You're processing and evaluating content online and then sharing your opinions about it and developing your own critical thinking. Even playing video games, like we're dropping a student right into the driver's seat of a story. It really helps to develop their narrative thoughts and helpful for improving their written compositions. So we can teach these same critical thinking and interpretation skills through digital storytelling, and just not turning our nose up to the idea of technology and media in the classroom and the benefits and pleasures that we can receive from that. So something that I really think is important to implement also, especially for those hands-on learners, is having students create content like vlogs or podcasts rather than just, again, like essays and book reports over and over again. This is really a way to vary your grading and what's expected of your students, and then just make sure that all different types of learners are going to be engaged and using their skill sets. These are my sources, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Hopefully you stuck around for the whole thing. Basically, the takeaway is that no matter what people say about maybe why they dislike our beautiful subject, there is a way to use those stereotypes and use them to kind of fight back and combat those stereotypes, and kind of just prove that this is a subject that can be relevant, it can be exciting, and it does not have to be boring or difficult or foreign or dated. All right, have a good day, everyone.